Something has shifted behind the silence you have been living with. Not because the universe has decided your future for you, and not because some unseen force has written your ending in stone, but because there are moments in human lives when one hidden truth becomes too heavy for the people carrying it. And tonight, in this fictional story of love, regret, and revelation, one of those moments begins with a message you were never supposed to receive. It arrived at 2:17 in the morning. No greeting. No explanation. Just 5 words glowing against the darkness of your phone screen. Please don't watch the video. You stared at the sender's name. Your soulmate's ex. For several seconds, you wondered if you were still half asleep. The room was completely still. A faint strip of streetlight rested across the floor, and somewhere beyond the window, a car passed through the empty road with a soft hiss against the pavement. Everything around you felt ordinary. Except for that message. You opened it again. Then another message appeared. I'm begging you. Your heartbeat changed. Not because you knew what was inside the video, but because of the desperation in those words. This wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It didn't sound like someone trying to win back an old relationship. It sounded like someone terrified that you were about to discover something they had spent months trying to bury. You almost put the phone down. Almost. But then the typing bubble appeared. And disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, another message arrived. You deserve to know what happened before you came into their life. That sentence stayed on the screen longer than the others. Before you came into their life. What could have happened before you? You thought about every strange pause your soulmate had ever made when you asked about the past. The conversations that suddenly changed direction. The photographs they never explained. The name they avoided saying. The night you once asked why their hands trembled when an old song played, and they simply smiled and told you, it's nothing. Maybe it had never been nothing. Maybe you had mistaken silence for closure. You sat upright, feeling the weight of a question that had been hiding inside hundreds of ordinary moments. What if the past you thought was finished had never actually ended? You tapped the message again. There was an attachment. A video. Your thumb hovered over it. Then your soulmate's ex sent one final warning. If you watch this, you'll understand why they couldn't tell you. That changed everything. Because now you weren't simply wondering what the ex had to say. You were wondering what your soulmate had been unable to say themselves. You pressed play. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, there was only silence. Then the camera turned on. The ex appeared sitting alone in what looked like a parked car. Their face was tired, not dramatic, not furious. The dashboard lights illuminated one side of their face while the rest remained in shadow. They looked directly into the camera. I don't know if you're going to believe me, they said quietly. Honestly, I wouldn't believe me either. They looked away. Then they took a breath. But I need you to understand something before you judge them. Your chest tightened. Judge them? Why would you need to judge your soulmate? The ex continued. They didn't leave me because they stopped caring. You froze. That was not what you expected. The ex swallowed hard. They left because I discovered something about them. Something they were trying to protect you from. The video stopped. You stared at the frozen screen. For a moment, you thought it had ended. Then another message appeared. Please. Don't make them explain this yet. You looked at the clock. 2:23 a.m. 6 minutes had passed. 6 minutes since your ordinary night had become something you could no longer understand. You opened the video again. This time, you noticed something in the background. A folded envelope rested on the passenger seat. Your soulmate's name was written across it. You leaned closer. The ex noticed it too. Their eyes moved toward the envelope. I almost destroyed this, they whispered. Your breath caught. But I couldn't. They reached for it. And for the first time, their voice broke. Because this is the reason they disappeared. The word disappeared echoed in your mind. You remembered. There had been a period when your soulmate suddenly became distant. Not cold. Not cruel. Just unreachable. They had told you they were overwhelmed. They needed time. They had promised they would explain. Then, one afternoon, they returned as if nothing had happened. You never pushed hard enough to demand the truth. Maybe you were afraid that asking too many questions would make them leave again. Now you were beginning to wonder whether that fear had been protecting the wrong person. The ex opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. They held it toward the camera. You couldn't see the entire image clearly. But you recognized one person immediately. Your soulmate. And standing beside them was someone you had never seen before. The ex whispered, "This was taken 3 days before I ended things with them." You stared at the screen. 3 days. Why would a photograph from 3 days before the breakup matter now? Then the ex turned the picture over. There was handwriting on the back. A date. A location. And one sentence. I promised I would never tell anyone. The room suddenly felt smaller. Because you knew that handwriting. You had seen it on birthday cards. On notes left beside your coffee. On the little scraps of paper your soulmate sometimes used when words spoken aloud felt too difficult. It was theirs. Your soulmate had written those words. I promised I would never tell anyone. You paused the video. 1,000 possibilities rushed through your mind, but none of them felt complete. Who was the person in the photograph? What had your soulmate promised? And why had their ex kept this secret for so long? You continued watching. The ex placed the photograph down. I need you to hear this part carefully, they said. They were never hiding another relationship from you. Your shoulders loosened for half a second. Then came the twist. They were hiding the reason they believed they didn't deserve one. Silence. The ex looked down. When I found out, I thought they were lying to me. I thought there had to be someone else. I thought I was being replaced. A bitter little laugh escaped them. I was wrong. They wiped beneath one eye. They weren't choosing someone else. They were running from themselves. The words landed differently. Because suddenly, memories began rearranging themselves. The way your soulmate apologized for things that weren't their fault. The way they sometimes pulled away after beautiful moments, as though happiness made them nervous. The way they would look at you with incredible tenderness and then become distant without warning. You had always thought they were afraid of commitment. What if they had actually been afraid of being loved? The ex leaned toward the camera. And that's why I'm begging you not to watch the rest. Your stomach dropped. Because the next part isn't about me. They reached toward the phone. It's about you. The screen went black again. You waited. Nothing. Then, beneath the video, a final file appeared. Not a recording from the ex. A voice message. From your soulmate. Recorded nearly a year earlier. You stared at the timestamp. The date was from before you had ever met them. Your finger moved toward the audio button. Then stopped. Because underneath the recording was a single line of text. The ex had typed it. If you hear their voice, you'll finally understand why they chose you, and why they almost walked away. Your heart pounded. You pressed play. For 2 seconds, there was only breathing. Then you heard your soulmate say your name. Not the nickname they used when you were together. Not the playful name from your happiest memories. Your real name. Spoken slowly. Carefully. As though they had been practicing how to say it for years. Then came the sentence that made you sit completely still. I met them before I ever knew who they were. You stopped breathing. The recording continued. And if they ever find this message, there's something they need to know about the person in that photograph. A pause. A shaky breath. Then your soulmate whispered 4 words. They are not a stranger. The recording ended. And for the first time that night, you understood why the ex had begged you not to watch. The secret was not simply about the past. It was connected to a part of your own story you had never remembered. And when you looked once more at the photograph, you noticed something you had missed before. A tiny detail in the corner. A place. A date. And beside it, written in faded ink, was a name you had heard your entire life. But you had never imagined it could possibly belong to this story. You reached for the photograph again. And just before you could read the final word written beneath that name, your phone suddenly rang. Your soulmate was calling. At 2:31 in the morning. And when you answered, there was no hello. Only silence. Then a trembling voice whispered. Please tell me you didn't find the photograph. The silence on the other end of the call seemed to stretch beyond the walls of your room. You could hear your soulmate breathing. Not calmly. Not normally. There was a tremor beneath every breath, as though they were standing at the edge of something they had spent years avoiding. You looked down at the photograph again. You know what I found, you said. Your soulmate didn't answer. Instead, they asked, did you read the name? You turned the photograph over. The faded handwriting was still there. A name from your childhood. A name connected to a place you had almost forgotten. For years, You had believed that place belonged to a chapter of your life that had closed before your soulmate ever entered it. But now the two stories were touching, and the connection felt impossible. "I saw it," you whispered. Your soulmate exhaled. Then came the words you never expected. "Then you finally know why I was afraid to love you." The confession didn't arrive dramatically. There was no music, no grand declaration, no perfect explanation. Just a tired voice telling the truth at last. They explained that years before meeting you, they had discovered an old box among belongings that had belonged to someone in their family. Inside were letters, photographs, and a record of a promise made between two people who believed they could protect the ones they loved by keeping certain truths hidden. One of those photographs contained your name. Not your photograph. Your name. And beside it was a date that connected your family history with theirs. At first, your soulmate thought it was coincidence. Then they found another document. Then another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. But instead of telling you, they became frightened. They feared that if you discovered the connection, you would believe your relationship had been arranged by circumstance rather than chosen by the heart. So they said nothing. And every day they remained silent, the secret became heavier. "You should have told me," you whispered. "I know." There was no defense in their voice. Only regret. "I wanted to," they said. "So many times. But every time I looked at you, I thought about how peaceful you seemed when you didn't know. You closed your eyes. Peace. That was what they thought they were giving you. But secrecy had never felt like peace. It had felt like standing beside a locked door while knowing someone on the other side had the key. Then your soulmate revealed something about the ex that changed the entire story. Their ex wasn't trying to keep us apart. You frowned. Then why did they send me the video? Because they were the first person who found out what the photograph actually meant. A pause. And they blamed themselves for what happened next. Suddenly, the ex's desperation made sense. They hadn't been begging you because they wanted your soulmate back. They had been begging because they believed their own actions had caused years of pain. Your soulmate explained that when the ex discovered the documents, they confronted them. They demanded answers. They believed your soulmate had known everything from the beginning and had deliberately kept you in the dark. The argument became the breaking point of their relationship. But later, the ex discovered the truth. Your soulmate hadn't known the full story. Neither had they. Someone else had deliberately separated the information. Someone had removed a crucial page from the old records. Someone had made sure the connection between your lives remained incomplete. And that meant the secret was no longer simply a family mystery. It was a choice someone had made. A choice that had affected both of you. You looked toward the window. The first pale hint of dawn had begun to appear beyond the buildings. You said there was a person in the photograph, you said. Who were they? Your soulmate went quiet again. When they finally answered, their voice was softer. My grandmother. You stared at the picture. The woman standing beside your soulmate wasn't a stranger after all. She was someone whose name had appeared in the old stories you had heard as a child. Someone your family had once known. Someone whose disappearance had always been explained with a simple sentence, "She left a long time ago." But she hadn't simply left. She had been carrying a secret. And your soulmate had eventually found evidence that she had tried to return. A letter had been written. Never delivered. A letter addressed to someone in your family. Your soulmate had found it hidden inside the same box. The letter contained only a few pages, but one sentence had changed everything. "If they ever meet, don't tell them what we did. Let them choose each other without knowing." You read that sentence again in your mind. Let them choose each other. Without knowing. Your soulmate's voice became almost inaudible. That was the promise. You felt tears gather in your eyes. Because suddenly, the question was no longer whether your relationship was real. The question was whether the two of you had been unknowingly walking through the consequences of decisions made long before either of you had a chance to choose anything. Then came another revelation. The ex had kept one more recording. A recording your soulmate had never heard. It was made on the night they separated. The ex had recorded it because they were afraid they would forget what had been said. And in that recording, your soulmate had admitted something. Not about the family. Not about the photograph. About you. They had already seen you once before you ever met. Years earlier. From a distance. Neither of you had known who the other was. But your soulmate remembered the moment. They remembered your expression. They remembered what you were doing. And they remembered something you had said to someone nearby. A simple sentence. Something so ordinary that you had probably forgotten it completely. But your soulmate never did. Because that sentence gave them a feeling they couldn't explain. Years later, when you finally met, they recognized your voice before they recognized your face. That was why the first conversation between you had felt strangely familiar. That was why they had once told you, almost jokingly, "I feel like I've known you longer than I actually have." You had laughed. They hadn't. They had already been wondering whether some forgotten piece of their past had just walked back into their life. But the deeper truth was still waiting. The ex's recording revealed that your soulmate had nearly walked away from you before your relationship even began. Not because they didn't care. Because they cared too much. They believed loving you might reopen something painful that had never properly healed. They believed that if they stayed, they would eventually have to tell you everything. And they weren't sure you would stay after hearing it. So they created distance. Then you came closer. They pulled away. You reached for them. They returned. And slowly, despite every reason they had invented to protect themselves, love became stronger than fear. But there was one thing your soulmate had never understood. The person who originally created the separation between your families had left behind another clue. And the ex had found it. A handwritten note tucked beneath the false bottom of the box. The note contained an address. Your soulmate had gone there alone. What they discovered changed the meaning of the entire mystery. The address belonged to a small house that had been empty for years. Inside, there was almost nothing. Dust. Broken furniture. A rusted lamp. And one wooden cabinet. Inside that cabinet was a sealed envelope. Your soulmate opened it expecting another old letter. Instead, they found a photograph of you. Recent. Taken only weeks before. Someone had been watching your life. Not in a supernatural way. Not through some impossible force. A real person had taken the photograph. A real person had known where you were. And beneath the photograph was a message. They are ready to know the truth. Your soulmate panicked. They took the photograph and left. But they didn't tell you. They told themselves they were protecting you. Then the ex found out. And that was when the video was recorded. Now everything began to make sense. The ex wasn't afraid that you would discover a betrayal. They were afraid you would discover that someone had been quietly carrying a secret about your life for years. Someone connected to both families. Someone who had remained silent while two people fell in love without understanding why their paths had crossed so strangely. You asked your soulmate the question that had been waiting between you all night. Who took the photograph? There was a long pause. Then they said, I don't know. You felt the disappointment immediately. But before you could respond, they added something that changed the meaning of those words. I thought I didn't know. Your heart sank. What does that mean? I remembered something. Their voice shook. Something I saw the night I found the envelope. You waited. I saw a reflection in the window. You could hear them struggling to breathe. There was someone outside. Your fingers tightened around the phone. Who? Another silence. Then your soulmate whispered the name. It was a name you recognized. A name belonging to someone you had trusted. Someone who had been present around your family for years. Someone you had never once suspected. And then your soulmate said the sentence that made the entire mystery more painful than before. They weren't watching you because they wanted to hurt you. A pause. They were watching because they were waiting for the right moment to tell you what happened. You looked at the photograph again. And suddenly, you noticed something hidden behind the image. A second piece of paper had been folded into the back. You pulled it free. There was only one sentence. Your soulmate was still speaking when you read it. If you want the truth about why our families were separated, go to the place where we first crossed paths. Your eyes widened. Because you knew exactly where that was. And beneath the sentence was tomorrow's date. Not yesterday. Not years ago. Tomorrow. The message had been waiting for you. And whoever left it knew you would eventually find it. But there was one final detail you hadn't noticed. At the bottom of the page, beneath the handwriting, was a tiny symbol. Your soulmate saw it through the phone. Their breathing stopped. What? You asked. They didn't answer immediately. Then, almost trembling, they said, that symbol wasn't created by my family. You looked closer. Your heart began pounding. Because the symbol was one you had seen before. Not in an old photograph. Not in a family document. Not in the mysterious house. You had seen it somewhere much closer. Somewhere inside your own home. And suddenly, the locked drawer you had ignored for years didn't seem ordinary anymore. You stood up. Your soulmate whispered your name. Don't open it alone. But your hand was already reaching for the key. And the moment the drawer opened, you saw what had been hidden there all along. A letter. Your name on the front. Your soulmate's name underneath it. And one sentence written across the envelope in red ink. You were never supposed to meet. You stared at those words as dawn finally entered the room. But before you could open the letter, your phone vibrated again. It wasn't your soulmate. It wasn't the ex. It was an unknown number. One message appeared. I know you found the drawer. Then another arrived. You have 10 minutes to decide whether you still want the truth. And beneath it came the final message. Because once you open that letter, there is no going back. The voice comes from the other side of the doorway. I was only trying to protect you. You stop breathing for a moment. Because you know that voice. It belongs to the person whose opinion once carried enormous weight in your life. But the memory does not unfold the way you expected. There is no dramatic confrontation. No secret confession. No revelation that they deliberately planned your downfall. Instead, you see something far more human. You see two frightened people standing in the same room years ago, each carrying wounds the other could not see. You see yourself with a dream in your hands, trembling because you are finally brave enough to speak it aloud. And you see them listening with fear in their eyes. Not fear of you. Fear of what might happen if you changed. They had watched people leave before. They had experienced disappointment. They had learned that security meant holding tightly to whatever felt familiar. And when you told them you wanted something different, they interpreted your growth as a possible goodbye. So they said the sentence that changed everything. I was only trying to protect you. You look at Michael. The anger you expected to feel never arrives. Instead, something inside you becomes strangely quiet. Because now you understand that intention and impact are not always the same thing. Someone can believe they are protecting you while unintentionally teaching you to fear your own potential. Someone can love you while still being unable to release their grip. Someone can sincerely care about your happiness and still give advice shaped by their own unresolved pain. That does not erase what happened. But it releases you from needing to turn the person into a monster before you are allowed to move forward. Michael speaks softly. You do not need their guilt to validate your pain. Those words reach somewhere deep. For years, perhaps you imagined that healing would come when they finally understood. When they finally admitted they were wrong. When they finally said, should have believed in you. But what if your healing does not have to wait for that conversation? What if the apology you have been waiting for is not the doorway to your future? What if the doorway was always yours? You look again at the younger version of yourself. That child is still there. Still waiting. Still wondering whether choosing a different path will cost them someone's love. You kneel beside them. For the first time, you do not tell them to be stronger. You do not tell them to stop caring. You simply say, you were allowed to want more. The younger you looks up. And something changes. The old memory begins losing its power. Not because the past disappears, but because you are no longer standing inside it. You are looking at it from the present. That distinction becomes everything. Michael turns toward the person from your memory. Their face is no longer threatening. They look tired. Human. Almost relieved. And you realize that perhaps they were carrying their own version of the same question. What if I lose you? Suddenly, the entire story becomes larger than betrayal. It becomes a story about attachment. About fear. About people sometimes trying to preserve relationships by preventing change, only to create the very distance they feared. You do not need to punish them. You do not need to chase them. You do not even need to convince them that you are right. You simply need to stop surrendering your future in exchange for temporary approval. Michael places a hand over his heart. Let them have their perspective, he says. And let yourself have yours. The words feel like a door opening inside your chest. You realize something else. The person who influenced you was never the final authority over your life. You gave them that position because you wanted to be loved without conflict. But real maturity is discovering that love does not require self-abandonment. You can care deeply and still say no. You can forgive and still create distance. You can understand someone's fear without allowing their fear to become your destiny. You can remember the good they gave you without pretending the difficult parts never happened. That is the freedom you were actually searching for. Not revenge. Not exposure. Freedom. The imagined sunrise grows brighter. The road ahead is no longer mysterious. It is simply unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity had been mistaken for danger for far too long. You take your first step. Then another. With every step, something falls away. The need to explain yourself. The need to convince doubters. The need to investigate every strange silence. The need to turn every disappointment into evidence that someone is secretly against you. You finally understand the deepest message hidden inside this fictional story. Sometimes the person working against you is not the person who speaks against your dream. Sometimes it is the fear inside you that repeats their words after they are gone. And sometimes the greatest act of protection is not discovering who wanted you to fail. It is discovering that they no longer have the power to decide whether you succeed. You stop walking. You turn around one last time. The person from your memory is still standing there. For a moment, you wonder whether you should say something. Then you realize there is nothing left to prove. So you simply say, I understand why you were afraid. But I cannot live inside that fear anymore. They lower their eyes. There is sadness in their expression. But there is also acceptance. Maybe they will understand. Maybe they will not. Maybe the relationship will change. Maybe it will eventually become healthier. Maybe it will remain distant. And for the first time, none of those possibilities controls your next step. Because your future is no longer dependent on their reaction. Michael smiles. Not triumphantly. Peacefully. You have been waiting for heaven to expose someone, he says, when what needed to be exposed was the belief that your life belonged to someone else's approval. You close your eyes. A tear moves down your cheek. But this tear feels different from the ones you cried before. It is not the tear of defeat. It is the tear that comes when a person finally realizes they can stop carrying something they were never meant to carry forever. The road ahead begins glowing beneath your feet. And suddenly you understand why August 18th became significant within this fictional story. Not because a mysterious date guarantees something supernatural will happen. Not because you are required to fear anyone. But because today can become the day you choose awareness over suspicion, courage over approval, and peace over endless investigation. You were looking for a hidden enemy. You found a hidden wound. And by finding the wound, you discovered the doorway out. That is the revelation. Not that someone secretly controls your destiny. No one does. Not the person who doubted you. Not the person who misunderstood you. Not the person who walked away. Not even the version of you who once made decisions from fear. Your life is still unfolding. And you are still allowed to choose what happens next. Michael's presence begins fading from the imagined scene. Before he disappears, he turns toward you one final time. Do not spend the next chapter watching behind you. You look forward. Spend it becoming someone your past could not have imagined. Then the light grows softer. The road remains. And you are standing alone beneath the morning sky. But you are not abandoned. You are finally standing with yourself. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels spacious. Like there is room for something new. Room for the dream you postponed. Room for the boundary you were afraid to set. Room for the conversation you have been avoiding. Room for the person you are becoming. And perhaps most importantly, room for peace. So if there is someone in your life who made you question yourself, do not rush to label them. Pause. Look at the pattern. Look at your own heart. Ask what belongs to them and what belongs to you. Keep the lesson. Release the weight. And if forgiveness is possible, let it free you not because what happened was acceptable, but because your future deserves more attention than your past. You do not need to carry anger into every new beginning. You do not need to become suspicious of everyone because one relationship hurt you. You do not need to harden your heart to prove that you have learned. You can become wiser without becoming colder. You can become discerning without becoming fearful. You can become stronger without becoming cruel. And you can walk away from what diminishes you without wishing destruction upon anyone. That is strength. That is maturity. That is freedom. So tonight, wherever you are listening to this fictional story, take one quiet breath. Think of the dream you almost abandoned. Think of the decision you kept postponing. Think of the voice that taught you to doubt yourself. Then gently tell yourself, I hear it. But I do not have to obey it anymore. Let those words settle. Because perhaps the most beautiful ending to this story is not discovering who was against you. Perhaps it is realizing that you have stopped being against yourself. May you find courage where fear once lived. May you find wisdom without losing your tenderness. May you recognize healthy love and recognize unhealthy influence without allowing either to define your worth. May the doors that belong in your future open at the right time, and may you have the clarity to walk through them without asking everyone else for permission. May your heart become lighter. May your mind become quieter. May your confidence return not as arrogance, but as the peaceful knowledge that you are capable of choosing your own direction. And may every painful lesson you survived become wisdom that helps you protect your peace without closing your heart. If this fictional message spoke to something you have been carrying, stay with that feeling for a moment. You do not have to solve your entire life tonight. You only have to take the next honest step. And if you want more cinematic spiritual stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with the one word that describes what you are choosing now: freedom, peace, courage, or growth. Let this be the moment you stop looking backward for an enemy and start looking forward toward your own becoming. The chapter behind you may explain how you got here, but it does not get to decide where you go next. And this time, you are walking forward with your own voice.